Welcome to the Openhearted Podcast. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Open... Whoops. Did it again. I forgot to press not repeat on there, but all good. Welcome to the Open-Hearted Podcast. I'm your host, Will Wheeler, and I'm joined by my main man, Photon John. What's going on, mate?
Just enjoyed a lazy weekend on the beach at Morton Island and decided I'd just chill out today and not work. How about yourself?
Nice, man. Well, no, I didn't go and chill out at Morton Island on the weekend. I definitely went to work today. But yeah, so pretty hectic. On the weekend, I actually got tickets to, is it Tim Minchin? Yeah, Tim Minchin.
Oh yeah, I saw that you went to that. Yeah.
Yeah, man. And it was it was actually not too bad. It was not too bad. It was there were free tickets. A mate of mine just called me and he goes, "Look, do you want to come to this?" And I'm like, hell yeah. So, for a lot of listeners probably not listening, I actually lost a really good friend last week. And, my mental health just has not been, I'm still struggling at the moment, but it was just good to have someone reach out like that and go, "Look, man, I see you struggling. You want to come to this?" So it really was, it was cool. It was a cool night. So it was pretty cool weekend,
And that was Dan, who we've had on the podcast before.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. So Dan, who we had on the podcast a few weeks, who spoke about mental health in the arts.
Yeah.
So it was really good. It was really good. And he is a full-on legend. Really cool guy and really cool to hang out with. But I tell you what, really cool guy and really cool person to hang out with, but not as cool and awesome as the guest we've got on the podcast today. All right, today we're going to be joined by Natalie Phillips-Mason. Sorry. See, I told you I'd stuff it up. Who's going to be talking to us about an awesome topic, the importance of allies in the neurodiversity movement. So, Natalie, welcome to the podcast. How are you today?
Hey, Will. Hey, Kev. I'm good. Yeah.
You ready for this?
I hope so.
How you feeling?
Good. I'm interested to see where it goes. So
you're interested to see how it goes. But I tell you what, you and I, we speak a lot about obviously neurodiversity. We speak a lot about the importance of allies in the neurodiversity community. So I think when you came to me with this and you said, "Look, this is a topic we really need to speak about," it was like, yeah, definitely, So I tell you what, we're really excited to have you on today and ready to rock and roll. What about you, Photon John? How you rolling, man?
I am pretty keen to get into this.
Nice.
I think it's a very important topic. I've got a lot of neurotypical friends and a range of different approaches that they take towards it. So this will be a good chat to have.
Nice. So Nat, before anything, I think it's really important that maybe give us a little bit of background on yourself and maybe a bit of the work you're doing, if that's okay.
Sure. So I guess I'll talk about my identity. So I am a cis female and I identify as she, her. I am the mum of two teenagers, both daughters, middle and late teens. So one kind of, I guess, a young adult. I live and work and was born in Melbourne, so Boonwurrung land. And what else do I want to tell you? I studied marketing and psychology and ended up accidentally falling into management consulting when I came out of university and ended up in a field called organisational change management. So For my career, I've always worked with organisations that are implementing really large-scale change programs. And so I guess if I simplify change management, because it's kind of one of those fields that you either know something about or it's a little bit fluffy and airy-fairy. But the concept of change management really came about in the 80s, where there are large companies, tech companies, implementing or building technology and spending a lot of money on building technologies. And when they went to implement them in organisations, they didn't quite land in the way that it was expected. So
yeah, cool.
was
some really cool stuff happening there. But, I think the biggest thing as well is that, you're doing so much around change management, but I think it works hand in hand because, we're seeing so many people now really wanting to look at neurodiversity. And this is where your experience really is really coming to fruition. Can't even pronounce that word, but it's a really
You've had a hard weekend, Will. You've had a hard weekend. You need to just
tell you the truth. I have.
Take a breath.
I've actually had a really hard week. Just my mental health is just not at 100% at the moment, but where I'm battling through it, But I think the biggest thing. Sorry, I didn't mean to have that one there. Sorry, but so for yourself, you've gotten into neurodiversity. What was the passion and drive behind that? Like, what made you want to really go, into that field and really make a mark in that?
Yeah. So we have 2 formally diagnosed young autistic people in the family.
Yeah.
And it's probably worth mentioning we have both the female and the male representation of autism, and there is a definite difference in the way that those 2 young people were diagnosed. There was a definite difference in the behaviours that those 2 young people, in the way they behaved, in the way they learned, in the way they communicated. So I guess I've been watching neurodistinct behaviours for a while, well over a decade. And I think when it comes to, the work that I do as a change practitioner and where that all comes from, there's a real synergy behind the work we do as change managers and trying to actually communicate with a whole range of people and make sure that we're understanding learning preferences and communication styles. And then what I've observed, certainly as as I've learned more about neurodistinct behaviours and all the different nuances in there, is that there are some really nice synergies, I think, between what change managers do and the way that we do our work, and starting to look at how organisations need to think about neuro-inclusion. And neurodiversity is part of that, right? So
yeah, totally.
Yeah. That's how I connect the 2.
Yeah, cool. And, I suppose as well, you're speaking about a lot of young people as well. I think a big thing is that, especially with, say, the neurodiversity movement, creating neuro-inclusive workplaces, all of that, as a responsible adult as well, you're probably looking at the future of, young people coming into the workplace. And, because we've probably seen, I've experienced firsthand, and I'm sure Kev has as well, some of the issues that we have faced as neurodistinct people. But I think as well that we're working towards a future that when people like ourselves can come into the workplaces here, it should be just as simple as that. They should be able to just blend in, right?
So I think absolutely. It should be. I think we all, I don't think it's ever that simple, but I think most certainly for me, looking at younger people coming into the workforce, looking at more of our younger generations that are really self-advocating for themselves a lot more with what they need. But I also think that we're seeing more adults being diagnosed, either because their children are or because they're discovering more about their own neurotype. And so we've kind of got this bottom-up, top-down effect happening. And I think I think we have to look at, inclusion and diversity that takes into account more than what we can physically see. And in a lot of cases, neurodistinct behaviours are, they're not always on the surface. And there's a lot of people who won't disclose that they have a diagnosis. There are a lot of people that'll never get a diagnosis. But I think, it's just about understanding more about neurodiversity, but how that kind of adds to the tapestry of what organisations already have in terms of the diversity of their workforce.
Totally. So, obviously the reason why we're here today is to talk about, so why are neurotypical allies important? So what we're covering over this today. You and I talk about this a lot. And, why are allies so important for this movement?
So I think there's a few reasons. Just speaking on behalf of me, everyone has their own perspective on this. I actually think we've really got to work at debunking a lot of the misinformation that's out there about neurodistinction. It is not really well understood. I think there's, there's a lot of shows out there that are kind of well-intentioned and trying to do the right thing. There's been a lot of media representation now since the 80s. And I think we just know so much more now about all the different neurotypes that exist and all the different cognitive strengths and challenges that go with all those neurotypes. And it is such a spectrum of behaviours, and we hear that all the time. But in actual fact, until you're interacting with more people and you can see the way that accommodations and adjustments really help people who, just think differently from one another. And I think we need to debunk a lot of that. And I think allies can help do that. Absolutely.
Yeah. Look, the thing I always, and this is me coming from someone who has developed in the neurodiversity community, being a neurodistinct person myself. And so I've seen a lot of what goes on a lot of the time as well. And, I think the biggest thing is that, having people supporting the neurodiversity community is huge, right? I'd go to a lot of events and I'd see that at the event it was all neurodistinct people. Now that's great, but the people we really need to influence and help understand neurodiversity isn't the neurodistinct people. Do you know what I mean? It's like preaching to the converted. Is that the saying or something?
Yeah,
like that?
That's the saying. I really think there's a partnership opportunity, and you and I have talked about this a lot. I think there's a lot of opportunity to create, and it goes beyond awareness. I think there's a lot of awareness. I mean, you can Google the topic and you'll find a whole heap of information out there, but I think it goes beyond awareness and actually having really authentic conversations about the topic and allowing people to ask questions in a really safe environment. I think that's something that's
Can
really
I say on that,
important.
right? You raise a really good point there, because it's definitely so important that people feel comfortable asking questions. But what I'm noticing a lot within the neurodiversity community, that some people are shooting down these people when they're asking questions, or maybe they're not pronouncing things correctly. And it's like, okay, I get where you're coming from, but instead of shooting these people down, why aren't we, and I'm talking about allies, why aren't we helping these allies to understand it better, so that there is a lot of issues around that as well. But yeah, sorry, you were saying before.
Well, to be honest, I've never once had that experience. I've been talking to people for a good, 2.5, 3 years now, and I've always found people who are really interested in sharing their story and interested in, and actually I had a conversation with someone this morning, and she said, it is actually so important not to just listen, but to actually ask. And so every time that I want to seek clarification, I'll ask, because what's the worst that can happen? You'll turn around and say, well, that's a stupid question. I'm not telling you. That's never once happened. So I think there's still, there's this perceived risk in organisations, which I think is justified in a lot of ways, of not wanting to insult and not wanting to come across as patronising or asking the wrong, the wrong thing. And there is a lot of controversy in the movement. You mentioned the movement, and it's, there's always extreme views in a movement. There's always a lot of passionate people who are raising their voices, and they're doing that for a reason. But I also think people don't need to know everything. We're not all expected to be.
Totally.
So ask the question.
Can I just give a quick shout out to Peter, because I really love his comment. Spectrum is misleading. In autism, it is more like a dynamic, multi-dimensional constellation that we either belong to or you don't. I love that definition.
So did you want to talk some more onto that, Kevin?
No, I just wanted to give it a shout out. It made me laugh.
Okay, cool. But, the thing is, like, if we're talking about language and all that type of stuff as well, I think it's so key to help people who are wanting to help in the community better understand the type of language, right? So, I see so many keyboard warriors out there, and it's like, they're doing some good stuff, but it's like, look, don't shoot down these people in a public setting. Let's try to help these people learn and help them, because we need allies just as much as allies need us, and vice versa. You know what I mean? So, that's a really big thing I really want to work towards. If someone calls, and this is the thing, I see people calling me neurodiverse all the time. If someone wants to call me neurodiverse, that's fine to me. Look, I get it. Within the community, a lot of people are really particular about certain wording and all of that. But I tell you what, there's a hell of a lot of other things that we should be working towards, where we can help educate people on that later, So I think sometimes we've really got to, just try and help educate people and not be these keyboard warriors putting people down and really working with everyone, So, things like that.
It's something that requires a whole of society change. So that means we need the whole of society to make things better and more well understood for our community. So, we really need to bring them in and have the conversation with them.
Yeah, totally. Because, I think that, allies play such a huge role in helping us to really build this. So if we're going to shoot people down, we're not going to be able to keep pushing that forward there, if that makes sense there.
And I really haven't experienced, I really have never experienced that. And, I think what I have experienced is people being really, grateful and wanting to embrace allies. And I think, I think as long as you're genuine with your intent, and as long as you are, as I heard Amanda Kirby say the other day, respectfully curious, then I think that's what we should be encouraging. But I think we also need to be creating spaces for leaders in organisations, because it's not that easy to find the right channels to necessarily go to if you really want to get cut through. There is a lot of information out there, and I think it's so I think for me that's a really important role. I think coming out of corporate, I think there's a role I can play as well in kind of having an understanding about what organisations are concerned about from a day-to-day implementation perspective. How, again, that change management piece that I was talking about earlier, that's what we do as change people, is we understand all the different stakeholders, and we actually need to create messaging and communication. We need to understand all the interests of those different stakeholders, and this topic needs that as well. because, first and foremost, we need to make sure that we're having the right conversations. And then we have to work together to make sure that what we're designing for workplaces is actually right. And so that partnership between allies and neurodistinct members of, people who are neurodistinct, and then organisations and leadership, there's this whole partnership aspect to it that I think is going to be really important if we want to implement properly.
Can I ask, what does a program look like that manages to, I guess you can't predict everything, but manages to account for the vast range of challenges or different environments they might need in terms of support to better thrive? What does that look like? How do you include all that? Because we're talking about a really big umbrella here.
Yeah, we are. And I think that's why I keep going back to kind of my experience as a change manager, because regardless of the different programs we might work in, at the crux of all of it is human behavior and human impact. And so I think when it comes to something like neuroinclusion, we are talking about another behavior change. And it's not just another, it's a very important one. But I think what we do is as change practitioners, we look at making sure that the narrative behind what we're doing is genuine. So why is an organisation interested in creating more inclusive work practices, as an example? It's all good and well to say, yeah, we want to do it because it's the right thing to do. That's actually not enough. I think we need to go further. And then we start to look at what the maturity of the organisation is. What are they doing now? What could they be doing? What those opportunities look like? And then you go through a process, I guess, of understanding what the impacts would be if you're going to start to look at creating work practices in a different way. So there's a lot of really neat synergies behind. I mean, that's simplifying what we do, but in essence, it's taking into account all the different interests of the people involved. I think for neurodiversity, there's a whole conversation there around advocacy and how you create that community within the organisation. Because I think, and Will and I have talked about this quite a bit, a lot of what I think both of us are seeing is this desire to want to jump to recruitment, which is a really important piece of this. We know that there's much higher disability unemployment than there is within the wider community. But I think we're missing something there, which is if there's up to 20% of the global population that will identify as neurodistinct, that 20% already exists within organisations today. So I think there's this real need to make sure that we're doing that education and that foundation work to make sure we're actually supporting the people in our workplace today. And then we can look at, what does that mean if we want to have more specific recruitment programs and things, because we're missing that foundational piece, I think, in my opinion.
Yeah. And, I think a big thing, and we've been talking, I might actually bring this up that it's sort of flowing into the next question anyway. What's your perspective on what isn't happening in neurodiversity that should be, right? Now, one of the biggest things, like, for example, I had someone who I know in corporate who's actually neurodistinct, and she shared something on LinkedIn the other day. I'm not going to mention her name. A lot of the information was incorrect, and I didn't blast her, in a public setting, because that's not good leadership. So I privately messaged her and said, hey, look, awesome to see what you're doing. What was I going to say? Awesome to see what you're doing, but what you said here, actually, that's totally false. It's incorrect. And she was good about it. She messaged me, she called me and said, hey, look, thank you so much for looking into that, Will. I'm so surprised because where I got that information from, those people there seem to be doing a lot of great stuff in the neurodiversity community. And it's like, well, that's the problem we're coming against. A lot of the information that you're finding online, for example, sometimes isn't the right information. And I think, you and I obviously having big conversations, and, really working in with leading researchers and that in this field in regards to, neurodiversity and stuff like that. Sorry, my mic's up a little bit too loud, apparently. How's that, mate? All good? Sweet. So so what's some of the things that you have, what's your perspective of what isn't happening within the neurodiversity community in regards to maybe, like I spoke about, people sharing the wrong information? We're starting at a lot of people are starting in the wrong place. So you said recruitment before. What's your experience on it?
Yeah. So look, I think, just to be clear, there is definitely a role for recruitment in this space. I just, I guess if I'm going back to that kind of genuine narrative and why, and that scaffolding that you need to build, I think there's some stuff there that we just need to kind of bridge the gap on a little bit more. But look, a few things. I think I would love to see more conversation happening in corporate at the leadership level. More stories, I think, being shared from, senior people who have had really big roles, who are maybe understanding more about their neurodistinction and maybe happy to talk about. And yes, I agree with you, Peter, and Ella needs to understand what it actually is. 100% agree.
And I think that's one of the problems we are coming against,
How difficult it is to explain is an issue as well.
Yeah, true. That's a really good point.
How do you explain a fundamentally different way of thinking to someone who doesn't think that way?
And can I say something on that, right? How can what I'm seeing is people are explaining what it is, and the people explaining it aren't like us. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's better from the horse's mouth, if that makes sense. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, for example, I could explain what I'm going through as a person with ADHD and dyslexia, than say if I told someone, then they explained it. You know what I mean? It's like Chinese whispers type of thing, right?
I think the really important part, it's not, for me, it's not just explaining, it's actually bringing to life what the experience is. And so I think a lot of this is talking about employee experience and what is the experience of a neurodistinct employee. What could that look like? Everyone's different. There's no, every person, every neurotype experiences life the way they see it. And that's not just neurodistinct people. Obviously, that's everybody. We've all got a brain. Our brains function differently. That's what it means to be human. But I think you've really got to go beyond explanation and go to sharing what it looks like. But I also think, to Will's point earlier, you need to be able to talk about the evidence and the research behind it as well. But you also need to do a lot of myth busting, and a lot of that, to go back to your question, Will, around what do I see could be happening more, and it's not within the neurodiverse community. I think it's that partnership piece that I was talking about before. Is I think we need to be listening to neurodistinct people who are coming from different backgrounds, and we need to be able to break down that stigma that there is something there is something not okay with neurodistinction. I think that couldn't be further from the truth. I think we need to make sure that we're sharing, what it means, what it feels like, what it looks like for someone who might have had a late diagnosis and might be really discovering more. And that's happening more in women at the moment, let's be honest. I think there are more women, because of the medical model, there are more women being diagnosed later. And I'm talking to those women at the moment who are senior members of organisations who are actually learning so much more about their own neurotype. And I'd love to hear more of those stories. That's one thing. I think the other thing that we're not necessarily doing as much in Australia as they're doing in Europe and in America is having these roundtable conversations at corporate level around the topic. I think it would be really good to see more of those kind of roundtable conversations happening. And you and I have talked about, there are seminars all the time going on that we're dialing into from here in the UK about people coming together and talking about the topic, and it's really creating a lot of conversation. So I would love to see more of that happen in Australia and this side of the world. They're probably the two key things. But maybe the third for me is I think we need to put more emphasis on the creative side of neurodivergent strengths, because there is a lot of focus on technology, data, maths, patterns, and absolutely that's there. But I think there is a whole other side, a whole other creative side to people that we're not maximising that talent. We're not tapping into it as much as we should be.
You
go, Kev.
That can create a bit of a feedback loop too. I know in a lot of jobs that I had before, and to be fair to the workplace, this was before I knew that I was autistic, but there was this sort of feedback loop in that the opportunities to thrive and what they thought they needed to give me, just based on personality type, I guess, was forcing me into situations I wasn't comfortable with, which was affecting my mental health, which was affecting my performance, and it just became this cycle of that. And job after job, that became an issue. And I thought it was me, but it was. It wasn't my fault, but it kind of was me because I was autistic. But there was no attempts to understand, no mechanism, even when I got diagnosed. Whereas once I started my own business, that's where I had this opportunity to, well, I'm really good at this, so I'm going to stick to this. 8 years in now. But I think, a workplace that perhaps understood that a bit better and could have nurtured what I was good at, because they would always be a bit confused because they'd be like, but you're really good at that part. Why can't you just fit the mold and do this other stuff as well?
Yeah, well, because there isn't a mold, right? But I think there's this, and I understand why there is such an emphasis on, kind of this perception of savant skills in the tech space. But I mean, I know more creatives than I do non-creatives, and the ability to the strength and the talent in those spaces, so marketing, branding, advertising, all of these areas where you use the creative side of your brain, I think there's some huge opportunities there.
Yeah, totally. So moving on. So where do you think the neurotypical public's perspective is at currently? What are your thoughts? And it'll be interesting coming from yourself, and then maybe Kevin. And the good thing about you, Nat, is I think the best thing when I met you was you seemed to understand it pretty well. So that was one thing I really respected about you. But yeah, please share this.
Okay, so I think there's a definite appetite. You're hearing more. You're hearing neurodiversity mentioned more as a word, as a term. So when that happens, that people are becoming more interested in the topic. I think when people like Em Rusciano and, Mia Friedman and celebrities are starting to come out and talk about their diagnoses, you've got more people interested and wanting to know more. I think there is this really interesting dynamic of environmental factors happening where organisations really, the concept of mental health and wellbeing after COVID is still very much high on the agenda for organisations, and the concept of, inclusion and belonging is really strong. Obviously you've got lots of conversation around perceived talent shortages and all this other stuff. So there's this kind of perfect storm of conditions, I think. So I certainly am seeing that there's a real appetite to understand. I think we're seeing still quite an appetite for neurodistinct recruitment, as we talked about before, without kind of necessarily looking.
And can I say, right? Yeah. And can I say in regards to that, they're looking at it like this is what I gather, right? I'm seeing that people are looking at this neurodistinct recruitment and thinking that, if we want to think differently and do that, all we need to do is just hire these people and, it's all fixed and we're going to have this great stuff happening. And it's like, and I suppose this is what we've been talking about before, that, there's so much more to do before we even look at that side of things. You can't just, get these awesome people and expect miracles. We've got to have the right systems in place, the right support, all of that type of stuff to be able to help these people to be able to work to their best, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think again that comes down to people not understanding the topic and not engaging with the information. And it's not, look, organisations don't know what they don't know. I think it's a big topic, and like I said before, I think there's still a bit of hesitancy around where do you go and where can you ask questions. And there's a lot of great organisations out there doing really good work in this space. So I'm not at all saying that they're not. There's a definite appetite out there. I think, I think the media is doing good stuff and it's not doing great stuff at the same time. I think shows like Love on the Spectrum and all these other shows that are chipping away at myth busting and trying to create awareness are doing some really great stuff. But I think I'm in two minds about those shows because I don't necessarily think they're always representative either.
And can I say something on that? I actually caught up with a good mate of Dan. I caught up with Dan, who was on the podcast the other week, and he actually brought up, Love on the Spectrum. Now, I love Love on the Spectrum. It's a great show, right? But, that doesn't represent, I just don't think it represents, it's about a small sort of part of what neurodiversity is, or, autistic people or stuff like that,
and it is a show. It is a TV show,
And it is a lovely show, to be honest. It's it's nice to watch and it's great to get some information. I just don't think it's necessarily as representative. So look, I think there's some really good things out there, but I do think that we are quite immature in our journey of having the conversation. And so I think we just need to keep talking about it. And
totally.
Bringing genuine information to the conversation.
Yeah, totally. And that's the thing. I think that it's just, So for example, we're obviously trying to develop, Kevin and I are trying to develop a dating and friendship app for neurodistinct people, right? And I've mentioned it to some neurotypical people, and they're like, oh, yeah, man, going back to Love on the Spectrum. Oh, yeah, I've watched Love on the Spectrum, and it's sort of like, yeah, well...
I understand it now.
Yeah. You know what I mean? I'm sort of like, yeah, but that's not what I'm getting at. That's just one part of, I wouldn't even say that Love on the Spectrum would be something that represents me, where people watch that and think that that's what we're like type of thing, right? And it's like...
I think it's one piece of information. I think,
it's
what's
a very
really
small part of the big picture, if that makes sense.
Well,
but to be fair to the people on the show, that is what people on the show are like,
Yeah, totally.
It is a part of it. We just got to be careful not to let all of society think that that's all of it.
Yeah.
So I think we've got some really positive changes happening. If you look at Chloe Hayden and the work that, and actually having an autistic actress or an actor, if that's the right, having an autistic actor in an actual autistic role is huge.
Yeah. And I think the real cool thing with Heartbreak High there, they really, and that's, they're a really good example because they have really, what's the word I'm looking for? Embraced, from what I've learned, especially watching that show and, especially listening to Chloe, they asked her for her advice. Do you know what would she be doing in this? And they built it around that character, which in the workplace, it pretty much should be the same. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think the complexity that we've always got in the workplace is that workplaces are built, with thousands of people in mind. And so I think this is, again, where this partnership concept comes in. I think it's really important to understand, every organization exists because it's there, to meet its shareholder value. It exists to serve its customers, et cetera, et cetera. I think none of that changes. I think what we need to do is make sure that we're understanding the complexities that are organizations and everything that they need to do in terms of system and process and everything else. But we need to be having a constructive dialogue around this so that organizations we can help leaders understand what this looks like in reality. And so you can create practices that are actually going to be more inclusive. And, we're not going to jump from 0 to 100 overnight. And I think that's my concern a little bit with the concept of outsourcing neurodistinct employees. I think we've got an opportunity to understand the workforces that we already have in place and really embrace everything that sits within it, and also have, and you and I will have conversations like this all the time. We've got to lean into some of the complexities here for workplaces and for leaders. It's not a magic bullet anywhere. So
yeah, and look, the biggest thing I think I like, working with you and other people within the neurodiversity community who are neurodistinct and neurotypical is that for me, working with each other is key type of thing, because we all have different strengths and weaknesses and all of that. And I suppose making neurodiversity, inclusive, that's what it's all about, because it's about everyone pretty much. So yeah, it's definitely key. So in saying that, you spoke a little bit about tech before, but what are some other areas in the workplace that better recognition is needed, do you think?
So probably for me, I'm not sure it's recognition in as much as it's just understanding that there are different strengths that come with every spiky profile, right? So when we're talking about neurodistinct people, they've got slightly spikier profiles than maybe your neurotypical community, but those profiles, understanding where those strengths are and understanding what adjustments could be made so that people can do their best work, I think cuts across every sector and every type of function. I think, again, for me, the creative side, so, in an age where we're really trying to understand our customers better, I think, marketing, advertising, brand are all areas that I think there's some really interesting opportunities for people who have special interests in that space. I think that, I'm pretty close to performing arts. Everyone who knows me knows that I love the arts because my children are very involved in them. And, the really interesting thing about the theatre, as an example, is that it's really there's a skill in learning a script and being able to perform a role, and be able to design a costume, be able to understand everything about what can bring theatre to life. So that's another area for me that that we've been pretty close to, that I think is quite extraordinary. I think any part of any vocation that anyone chooses to do, I think it's just about understanding where your strengths are and understanding what it is about your own profile that causes you challenges so that you can do your best work.
Totally. And this is the thing. I think a big thing is, the best thing I've noticed is that, neurodistinct people, we're in nearly every job and role you can think about, right? But I think the biggest thing that I have found, and especially speaking to other people within the neurodiversity community, is that a lot of the time we may have struggled to be able to evolve and develop in those roles. We've been underemployed, all of that. So I think a real big thing, especially with the neurodiversity movement, is that we really need to look at how we can start helping these people, not just jobs, but once they're in these jobs, how are we helping these people to develop, and become those future leaders who will then influence, other neurodistinct people, other neurotypical people, whatever that is, right? It's just like with Chloe Hayden, who we've just been speaking about. Now, she is not only influencing, the neurodiversity community, she's doing more outside of it as well, which is fantastic. And that's a really good sign of what neurodiversity leadership is really about. So, trying to really build and develop on these people to really help to build, I suppose, the future of neurodiversity as well, I think is going to be key.
I think it is. I think one of the things for me with what you've just said is I think we need to think about how we define success in the workplace as well. So, it's not just about once people join an organisation, there's a talent cycle and there's an employee experience cycle that goes with that. So you want to be able to do your job. You want to be able to feel like you belong. You want to be able to, produce good work, whatever it is that is your definition of success. But, that's why this whole change systems view of organisations is really important, because there's all different levers that you pull within organisations to ensure that the outcome is right. If we can't be flexible in how we define success, if we can't think about putting the right people in the right jobs and actually having those conversations really early in the recruitment cycle, so we're not actually trying to mismatch people to jobs, I think that's going to be really important, and it is important for anyone. Doesn't matter who you are.
I think what you're saying would benefit everyone. It's an approach you can take. Any company could take, I think, much more successfully to all of their employees, instead of just going this. I've worked for big companies like Telstra and stuff, so I've been through that factory line. Where this is the kind of person that we need, and these are the kind of duties that you need to perform, and if you don't fit that, go away. But I think it could benefit neurotypical people as well. And I think that the companies would operate better with the right people in the right places. Yeah,
and it's this concept of culture add versus culture fit, which is a really big topic, as part of this conversation, because it's not necessarily about how you fit a culture, it's how you can add to a culture. And I really like that. I think that's a really important
But I think a big thing is we need to stop looking at what can't people do and start looking at what can people do. All right, maybe I can't write something up without having spelling mistakes in it, or my punctuation isn't good. But I tell you what, there's other people who could probably look over that and, get that right for me, so little things like that. And I suppose this is where teamwork is really important as well. We're all a part of a team. It's not about someone sitting in the back room, leaving them alone. How can we work together as a team to make each other look good? I think that's that's just teamwork altogether. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it is. It's just teamwork. I think we're just putting a different lens on that with this conversation.
Teamwork is what makes the dream work, right?
Apparently so, Will. Apparently so.
You like that one, Kev?
Yeah. I've heard a lot of platitudes and stuff like that, from but the culture bit was always the hardest part for me. And I know I can only speak from an autistic point of view, but it harmed my mental health, because you're just constantly being told, because you are not this exact shape mold, you're just not a good employee, and they would, and I've been fired from jobs where they've just spent the whole time firing me, dragging it out, telling me how awful I was at the job. And it's like, and then, as I've developed in my career and will come to have more of an understanding of my brain and stuff, I found all these things that I can do amazingly and that I'm now, a sought after expert in. But it was just that I think we've said it a few times on the podcast, but that quote that's always misquoted to Einstein, judge an elephant by its ability to climb a tree and it'll always be a failure.
Totally. Hey, you know what I forgot to ask today? Does anyone have any questions they would like to ask? I thought we've been so stuck into like talking and chatting and all that, we forgot to ask if anyone's got any questions for Natalie or myself or Photon John. I think sometimes with this program, it sometimes has a little bit of a lag, so I think things come through a little bit later, but if someone does want to come through with some questions, that's okay. We'll get through to it. Oh, hang on, we just had something come through there. No questions as of yet. Okay, cool. So let's have a look at this last one here. What changes need to happen to create neuro-inclusive work environments? What do you think, Nat?
I think just to reiterate what I'd previously said, I think we need to be having really genuine dialogue, and we need to be giving leaders a chance to ask questions in a safe environment. I think we really need to be presenting information that can be practical and that can be really practical and that can be constructive, and we can, work towards implementing and changing practices that actually suit the maturity of the organisation and where they're trying to go and who they currently have in their workforce. So for me, that's still really the really important first step. And then obviously for me, being a change person, it's actually around making sure we're understanding how we ready a business based on where they want to go in this space, but understanding what neuro-inclusion means and how neurodistinction plays a subset there is I think still really important. And I think we'll see more come from that once those conversations happen.
Cool. So where have you seen great practices?
Where have I seen great practices? So I can talk about something that I saw actually a little while ago. It wasn't something I had direct involvement with, but I was going through my emails yesterday, and I found an example of an organisation, I think it must have been during COVID or just after, where they gave everyone a quiet week. So, you've got this concept of quiet hour happening in retail in different organisations. This organisation decided to give their employees a quiet week where they just gave them some time to, just recalibrate and I guess, manage their own heads and their own spaces and their own workload, which I thought was quite cool at the time. I'm really, I guess, at the start of my own practice in this space. So I'm hoping I'm going to see much more in the coming, 6 to 12 months, and I think we will. I think there's much more maturity around other inclusion and diversity pillars like First Nations and gender and LGBTQ+. I think in the neuro-inclusion space, we're going to see more. We're going to see more.
Nice. Kev, did you have anything else you wanted to talk about, my mate?
No, I think that's about it from me. But thank you, Nat, for coming on. That was very enlightening.
That's okay, yeah, and I'll forgive Will for shutting down my earlier change management conversation because I had so much.
Oh, really? Well, what did I cut you off about?
No, that's all right. It's your podcast.
No. I'm gonna share it now. I'm all in.
I know. I was actually just going to say that, you know, I feel quite lucky because I've worked in so many different organisations and so many different sectors where you see so much diversity in the work that you do, in the programs and the people we work with. So I think for me, I've always loved working with people from really different backgrounds and different perspectives. And I think that's why I think this is such a great opportunity for where we are here, because I actually think there's heaps of opportunities. I just think we've got to have the conversation in the right way as well. So
yeah, totally. And yeah, that's the thing. Like, I think the big thing is that it's all right to have like a big heart, right? But, you know, you've got to approach things the right way. You know, we're seeing so many people approaching neurodiversity and they mean it in the right way, but they're not approaching it in the right way, if that makes sense. Okay. So they might say, oh, look, we want to do, you know, we want to hire more neurodiversity people, but they're not finding out what it is that they need help with. So one of the biggest things would be speaking to the community first and, you know, really trying to help, you know, work together to build that rather than going, okay, we're going to do this, right? Sort of putting the cart before the horse type of thing, you know? So,
well, that's that partnership word again, right? Which is why I keep coming back to it. It's got to be a two-way conversation.
Totally, you know. Awesome. Kev, did you have anything else you wanted to talk about, mate?
No, I think we've pretty well covered off. I've seen Turkan has been commenting quite a bit here about, you know, how we need to be involved in the conversation and
totally.
They need to let us sort of lead the conversation, but facilitate it, I think. So I feel like we've driven the point home pretty well.
That's good. Awesome. So thank you, everyone, for listening today. Nat, it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast. It's we've been trying to get you on for ages, but we just have so many people wanting to come on, so we're finally able to get you on. So it's been fantastic.
Thanks for having me.
Not a problem. You got much planned for the weekend?
No, isn't it Monday?
It is Monday.
Planning for the weekend already. No, not that far. I'm not that far ahead.
Oh my God, I forgot it was Monday.
Only Monday. You got a way to go.
What were you saying, Kev?
I said you've had a long week already.
Oh man, to tell you the truth, I was speaking to my wife about it just before we went on, and I said, you know what, I'm really looking forward to just having a few weeks off over Christmas. You know how you're getting towards the end of the year, and it's just like, you know, it's been quite a productive year, but I just feel that like I'm ready to have a break. You know what I mean? Yeah. I just need a break, you know. So all good with that, Nat. It has been so good to have you on the podcast today. Before anything, I didn't even say it today. For all of the people listening today, if you haven't already done so, please subscribe, like, and follow our social media pages. It really helps with the podcast, and you know, the more followers, the more interaction we get, the more information we can do, and to help people really work towards building neuro-inclusive workplaces, neurodiversity as a whole, and helping with our mental health. So yes, thank you so much for everyone who's joined us today. All right, I just want to make sure that our end song is not on loop. But Nat, thanks once again. Photon John, you're a legend, mate. My name's Will, and this is the Open-Hearted Podcast. Until next time.
See ya.